In today's video, I'll share with you some of the more interesting feedbacks that I received from successful candidates. And these feedbacks are all coming from Twitter, which I'll link in the video description. The reason for sharing these is because I want you to understand what works for other candidates preparing for an interview, and what makes a difference while consuming my content. What are the use cases that are the most successful in using my content for job interviews? The first one I want to touch upon here is then I just received an offer from Amazon for a finance role. Your videos helped immensely, and almost every single question, with the exception of one, were from your 35 common questions. So the takeaway here is, that these lists of questions, of most commonly asked questions, actually do work. Why do they work? That it's probably a longer explanation. That's not the purpose of this video, but the takeaway is here that regardless if you're applying for Amazon or with other companies, especially with FAANG companies, lists of most commonly asked behavioral questions do work. So you should definitely take this seriously. The second feedback I want to share with you is from someone who actually was coming from a non-FAANG company and actually got successfully into Amazon. And the takeaway that I wanted to share with you here is that he treated the job application as a job in itself. So it's not uncommon for me to hear from people preparing for 6 months for an on-site interview. It could be, of course, both for the technical as well for the behavioral side of things, but it is very common, and this actually happens, and it happens more often for people coming from non-FAANG company willing to be successful and to get a role with these types of companies. So you should definitely be aware of this scenario as well. I watched a ton of your videos before my Amazon interview last week, and I ended up getting the job. Tell me about yourself question was a great way to impress them right away. So tell me about yourself, although not necessarily a behavioral question, it is one that's super important in a job interview. Reason for this being that maybe your interview didn't have the time to go through your CV to learn more about yourself. And this would be a great starting point for your performance. And think of it like this: you might have 6 virtual on-site rounds, and each of the 6 interviewers might ask you this question. This does actually happen. So that's why it's that important. Next feedback. I was asked more than 15 questions, and all questions are included in your list. The list with the 22 most commonly asked questions in Amazon interviews. So again, these lists actually do work. Just don't use only the lists while preparing for example, for an intense behavioral interview. So lists work, but you should keep in mind, use them with certain precautions if you want. Next feedback. This video got me the job. The video with Why Amazon. So remember, just earlier I said I talked about the video about tell me about yourself. Now this one is about why Amazon. These are, the general types of questions that you really must take seriously, because if you start the conversation on the right track, you'll automatically gain a lot more confidence and therefore be more successful in your application. So that's why Amazon, for this candidate was really, really essential. Hi Dan, thanks for your videos. They really helped me to secure a job at Amazon. I would recommend to all candidates to go over the 35 most commonly asked questions. So again, this is the list of most commonly asked questions. This is actually the first version I did. Then I trimmed those 35 to 22 most commonly asked questions in Amazon interviews. And by the way, I have lists with many other companies, with Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and so on. And I even have lists that are non-company specific. I also have lists by position titles, by roles that you would want to use. I also have a mock on-site interview as an example that you might want to use. So these actually do work if you choose to go that route, or take it as an exercise if you have time. Next feedback here. Be prepared to answer why Amazon and tell me about yourself. There you go. So as I just said, those 2 questions are really essential, the starting point of a conversation. I watched a few of your videos after my interview was scheduled and decided that there was no way they would hire me. Now, this is, and by the way, this is a successful candidate. This is a scenario that's rather isolated, but you should keep this in mind. There are very sensitive candidates that really, do not appreciate getting right into it. So that's why, you might feel discouraged, but I believe the main takeaway from this specific feedback is that they were able to self-assess properly. In other words, there's also this false approach that you feel like you know that you don't know to answer such a questions, but you try to read between the lines and you try to see, you try to clone that answer in a certain way, right? So there's various ways to hack a behavioral interview, and this is one of the worst, trying to clone an answer. But the idea is that if you are able to self-assess and know exactly that, hey, you're not good at it and you really must get good at it and spend the time, invest the time to prepare for it, it's a great way to improve your chances to get to land a job if you want. But this is also about motivation to a certain extent, but also about self-assessment primarily, in my opinion. Next one. Thanks to your video, I secured a position with Amazon as a graduate area manager. It really helped me and made me more confident in myself to give the right answers. Confidence. Yes, people do use these videos for confidence, to gain confidence with these things. Yes, after all, you're just consuming content, so it can only be as efficient as that. I cannot tell you what to say in a job interview, especially in a behavioral one. So that's why, motivation is also an important aspect. I think the best advice from you was to be myself. Right? Be yourself. Yes, I definitely agree. This is very important advice. And again, slightly on the motivational side of things. Next feedback. The content you put out really helped me. One thing I would suggest to anyone that is thinking about interviewing is to start a diary at work and record any significant events where they failed, took risk, or generally did something significant. Now, this is in the broader context of preparing stories for the behavioral part of the interview. And many people have challenges coming up with these stories. So yes, I can confirm, if you don't have experience, it will be challenging for you. And if you have at all the luxury that you will know that you have an upcoming interview, and I don't know, in months, then yes, starting a diary with your more interesting experiences and doing this, over time, consistently, yes, that's the ideal approach. While I said the 6 months preparation time, if you have it, if you're coming from a non-FANG background, that's the best possible approach, and it does pay off, believe me. Next feedback. I loved your advice about preparing failure stories. That really helped. Another great advice is roleplay. So the failure stories are super useful for people that are not super sensitive and that just prefer to get right into it, as a great way to ramp up their performance significantly in your behavioral interviews. So if you do not get easily discouraged, start with the failure story. Start preparing the failure stories, and this will significantly ramp up your performance. Roleplay, yes, roleplay. In fact, it's only the first time I'm saying it right now, but it will be also in subsequent feedback. But it's hugely important. That's why I even have a free roleplay service, where I just help you match with other people to roleplay. I believe roleplay is actually super essential, and again, a great way to self-assess at the end of the day. So that's why I definitely recommend you. Next feedback here. This is from a 60 years old candidate who has been made redundant from previous role, who has been successful in a manager role at Amazon, and he says there's no age discrimination at Amazon. I can confirm this. Doing mock interviews on Skype with my daughter, it helped a lot to remove the nervousness which I normally have in job interviews. So again, this is about role play. Also about removing nervousness, but I would in this was I'd say a rather niche example where it helped him to self-motivate. But the main reason why I do role play is to self-assess usually. But also, yes, do role play, and do role play with multiple people if at all possible. Because if you only do with one coach, for example, that experience might be super biased on that specific personality of your coach, or the preference of the questions that you role play, and chances are you're not going to get close enough to the interview experience. That's why I would definitely recommend to role play with multiple people if at all possible. Next feedback. Like the poster below, I was asked about 17 questions total, phone plus chime loop, and every single one of them was either on this list or the older top 35 ones. So either on the 22 questions, either on the 35 most commonly asked questions. The interviewers either asked them word by word, word for word, or just a very slight variation. Yes, but I'd say that's a little bit niche scenario here. For anyone else prepping, just breathe. Check out all of your Dan's videos, please don't, but don't overwhelm yourself. Take your time, relax, and take a deep mental dive into your entire career and really search through everything you've ever done. Don't worry, you'll absolutely find something relevant to the principles. Get about 8 to 10 really strong stories, even more. Write them all out in big, long, windy paragraphs if necessary, then apply star to it and start trimming the fat until you get to a good 2-3 minute free-flowing example. The 2-3 minute thing is a very useful rule I found. Then practice. Spend the time to practice. Ask your wife to roleplay with you, if possible, and really flesh out all your examples and get as much feedback as possible. If your partner starts zoning out because she can't understand what you're trying to say, believe me, the interviewers are going to do the same. Yes, I believe that's also valid advice, but I would definitely roleplay with multiple people, because it also happens that people genuinely don't understand what you're talking about because it might be too technical. Now, if your partner, your significant other, is someone technical enough, then yes, that definitely makes sense, to self-test to see how they sound. And even you, if you record yourselves speaking, you will find things you wouldn't have otherwise noticed. But yes, very useful advice as well. Next, this video, the one with 2 questions for each leadership principle and the other one with the preparation checklist, are key for succeeding. So this video is a simple example of a deadly mistake. So these 3 videos, if you want, were also, I found these are pretty good videos if you want a starting point into these things. Next feedback: I had very low confidence after my first round interview, but thanks to your videos, I must have watched 20-30 of them. I gained confidence and got the job. So again, the motivational aspect is really a significant one preparing for these behavioral interviews. And of course, use whatever information you find to your advantage. Don't discourage yourself, right? So this is, again, relevant. I could not stress enough the importance of things such as questions for dumb, behavioral answer questions with STAR method, and of course the 14 leadership principles connected to real work experiences. So questions for dumb. Questions for them, not many of you realize how important are, but if you prepare questions for them that really make sense, it could really change the outcome of your interview. So that's why I believe that the highlight here was the questions for them is something you'd want to touch upon. I have plenty of videos on this one as well. Not only did I get an offer, but they offered me a principal level 7 essay role because of how well the interviews went. So this is from a candidate applying for a level 6 role who actually obtained a level 7, an offer for a level 7. Actually, it's a first for me to hear these things, because for me the normal scenario is that you apply for level 7 and they offer you level 6. But to give an example, to give proof that if you prepare and if you're exceptional, they might actually give you a better offer than you would expect. And it's actually, I'm lying here, it did happen. Now I remember, it did happen in certain cases to get better offers than the candidates would have expected. Yes, I'm not sure in terms of levels if that was a superior level or not, but offers better than they expect. Yes, that happens. That happens quite often, actually. Next feedback: your 35 behavioral question series really helped me to prepare for my interview at Amazon. So again, the list with the most commonly asked questions does make a difference. I'm commenting on this video specifically because it was the most helpful for my interview preparation. The 22 most commonly asked questions in Amazon interviews is the video in question. So lots of the questions I got were similar. Again, to the most commonly asked questions. Next feedback: I have 20 plus years of experience in the field, and it was biggest help was getting into the right mindset for the interviews. So again, it's the scenario where you have plenty of experience working, maybe even for the same employer, and then having to do such an intense interview. There will be challenges getting into the right mindset, and by consuming this type of content, that's one of the best use cases that you might get, getting into the right mindset. Aside from the information, yes, information is valuable, but it can only be as valuable as that. But going even further, if you get in the zone, if you want, that will also serve you well in the process. Your collection of Amazon interview preparation, along with sample right and wrong answers, helped me a ton in my most recent interview. So by the right and wrong answers is the $50 training, you know. So if you need samples of questions, so hey, what's right, what's wrong, there's also this shortcut if you want. And the main reason why I'd want to use that is because, not that I don't have examples on my YouTube channel, I do have them, but they were done either 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and that training that I constantly update actually, and it gives you straightforward advice. Hey, this is what works, at least in my opinion. You know, it's of course a subjective thing, but you get what works and what doesn't, and you can self-assess quickly, and especially for a phone interview, because I find that it's primarily for phone interviews, although it worked also for on-sites if you're curious. Embed your work experience stories with the leadership principles, because the loop has very little technical. Your conversation are based on you exhibiting the principles in real life situations. So this is a feedback from someone who did not get asked technical questions, and the saying is that, at least specifically at Amazon, I should say, around 80% of the on-site is behavioral and maybe 20% technical. Yes, I believe this is good advice, but take it with a grain of salt, and I'm going to give you also a counterexample. I can confirm the behavioral questions matter more than one's technical skills, since Amazon will train you anyway. Yeah, so this is again one that says, a candidate says the behavioral one is the biggest part, and I believe, yes, this happens most of the time. However, something that a candidate wished he had done better is to prepare more for the technical portion, even though I was falsely told I wouldn't have one. So this candidate actually has, from his 5 or 6 rounds, 3 of them, 3 were technical, when in fact he specifically asked his recruiter, hey, will there be any technical rounds in the interview? No, don't worry. So also be prepared, because usually how it works is like this. You get asked the behavioral questions, or not even the general types of questions. Tell me about yourself, right? Because they don't know about you much. You talk about yourself, then you go into a project, with a couple of behavioral questions, then they dive even deeper with some technicalities. Now, those technicalities, of course, in the most simple scenarios, they could only mean some metrics, to remember some numbers for the least technical of you. But for the technical view will also mean diving deeper and even making case studies, talking about what would you do if that would have happened, talking about hypothetical situations. It can easily go super technical depending on your interviewer, but usually you'll know this depending on who you'll be interviewing with. And I know not many of you will know the names of the interviewers, but at least when the interview sessions begins, you will know who that person is, and you should of course tailor your performance according to their skill set. So if that's someone technical, of course you'd want to use the STAR format, but the STAR format in a context of a getting ready to get into the details, should they be interested into this. So long story short, yes, the Amazon interview is primarily behavioral, the on-site one, but you should also prepare technically speaking to refresh your technical stuff. And finally, this is on the feedback on a specific video on 2 examples for each of Amazon's 14 leadership principles. Why I included this feedback is because it's not one of my most liked videos for sure, probably because it has too many ads, but also to tell you that those types of videos, that's a long form video, 40-minute video, into which I give 2 examples of for each leadership principle, both of a question and an answer, to understand the behavior there. So this is another exercise you'd want to do in case you want to understand a little bit more about those principles. It's more like at the beginner level, I would say, or beginner to mid levels, but that's also something that some of you have found useful in your interview preparation process. So these would be the feedbacks that I wanted to talk about here. Notice here, there are various trends, and different people find different things useful, but there are certain things in common here. Namely, getting in the right mindset, role-playing the list with the most commonly asked questions, being the most important, of course, being yourself and getting in the case of Amazon, the leadership principles right. But I hope, you found at least some of these scenarios useful for you to consider using for your own interview preparation. So thank you very much for watching.